The following is an encore presentation of a pre-recorded program. To join one of our many live presentations, please visit cje.net/events, call 773-508-1000, or follow us on your favorite social media platform.
So again, I'm Sharon Dornberg-Lee. I'm the clinical supervisor with CJE SeniorLife. I'm joined by my colleague, Roseanne Corcoran, the manager of CJE SeniorLife, who won't be speaking today, but who's helping out just to monitor the Q&A. And our topic today is reopening anxiety. This is part of our monthly community education series called Insights on Aging on a variety of mental health topics. So we hope you'll join us every month for this series. We have a lot of good topics, and if you look at cje.net on our calendar of events, it always lets you know what the upcoming will be in the following month. So as Roseanne mentioned, it's very fortuitous that this topic, reopening anxiety, happens to be scheduled for today, which is also the day that the city of Chicago is officially kind of reopening everything. But even prior to today, as you all know, a lot of us are experiencing a lot of anxiety about COVID and where we stand, and this idea that now things are getting back to normal, but what's that going to look like? And a lot of anxiety is going along with that. So let me run through the agenda for the hour that we have together today. First of all, this is really an anxiety-provoking time, right? We're going to talk about why that is, why we may be feeling anxious. And I say we because we're all in the same boat together right now of trying to figure out how to cope with some anxiety that we may be feeling, although we may be feeling it at different levels, and we'll talk about that too. And then how can we have a conversation about the anxiety we might be feeling, about the questions we may have about how to be safe right now, and kind of how do we have that conversation in a way that doesn't ruffle feathers, that doesn't, cause conflict, but that can help us find a way forward. Then we're going to talk about some really specific strategies like we might use in our work as counselors with our clients, drawing from cognitive behavioral therapy and other techniques to work on reducing anxiety. We're going to talk a little bit at the end about special considerations, special populations or groups that may be having particular difficulty during this time. And then finally, how to get professional help if you need it. And, after all, we are counseling services at CJE. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about how to access our services and other mental health services during this time. So we want to make sure you know that those services are out there and kind of how to check in with yourself to decide if you might be needing that or not. So first of all, I wanted to share this cartoon from the New Yorker that I thought really, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think this really speaks so well to what many of us are feeling. It says, "I panicked when they said we could come out of our shells again." And I don't know if people want to put in the Q&A perhaps just a yes if that speaks to you at all. Is that something that you're nodding your head to, that you felt, a little bit like a turtle this last going on a year and a half already, where we felt a bit like we were in our shells and kind of maybe safely in our shells. And now we're being told we can come out again. And it's a little scary, right? We're feeling a little panicked. So you're not alone. If you're feeling a little bit anxious or a lot anxious even, you're certainly not alone. And I see some of you are saying that in the chat. That just in February of this year, the APA, the American Psychological Association, did a survey. This was all ages, not just older adults. And they found that 49% of those that they surveyed were feeling uneasy or worse about resuming face-to-face interactions. And that was regardless of whether they were vaccinated or not. So half of us are feeling uneasy. Presumably the other half are said, no, I'm completely comfortable. But fully half of us are feeling uneasy about face-to-face interactions, regardless of vaccination status. So if you're feeling anxious, you're in good company. And I think if you take nothing else away from this hour today, it would be that whatever you're feeling is normal, that right now we're all going through a gamut of emotions. And I think when the pandemic first hit, there was a lot of talk in the media and in different corners about the emotional impact of the pandemic. And I think less attention has been paid to this issue as we're reopening, that again, people are often feeling a whirlwind of emotions and are feeling a lot of, variation in what they're feeling from day to day. So you may be feeling anxiety, you may be feeling afraid, you may be feeling angry. I've heard that a lot from the clients that I work with. I've experienced that when people are doing it differently than you. So it might be some people are saying, no more masks, we're done with that. And that may be making you feel unsafe and therefore angry. Or it may be the opposite, people who are overly conservative and you're thinking, oh my gosh, come on, let's get back to normal life already. And so neither of those are wrong. Whatever we're feeling is normal and is expectable. You may be feeling a lot of sadness and even grief. And of course it's expectable and, kind of, there's a lot of what we call disenfranchised grief, which is grief that's not really recognized as such, even for people who haven't lost somebody, God forbid, to COVID. Just the way life has changed can be a grief process. That's a sort of disenfranchised grief. There's not a lot of societal sanction or talking about the fact that this is a loss, because even as things are reopening, people are not going back to the life they knew before, right? Things aren't exactly the same as they were before. We're not sure. The virus is still here. Some people are vaccinated, some aren't. The vaccine's not 100%. So it's normal to feel some grief or sadness at this time. And if you've had loss of loved ones, certainly then grief will be compounding that. For many people, there's an eagerness to say, hurry up, let's get back to normal life. They can't get there soon enough. And for other people, there is that turtle-like sense of wanting to kind of go back into your shell and say, let's slow down. And those things aren't mutually exclusive, those last two, let's hurry up and let's slow down. You might feel both of those things. You might feel both of those things in the same day, right? So these are our emotions are kind of all over the place as we're adjusting to this new normal. And I'm trying to just look at the questions here and take a quick scan, and I'm just not seeing anything urgent, but some agreement that these are the emotions we're feeling. So I wanted to show you some more cartoons. This is part of a longer series by Emily Flake of The New Yorker called Visions of the Post-Pandemic Future. And we didn't have time to go through the whole series together, so I just pulled out a few, but you might want to look this up. I thought it really captured some of the emotions of anxiety around this time. It says, last spring, I had all these fantasies about what it would be like when the pandemic ended. I'm going to hug everyone so hard. I can't wait to put my face right into all the other faces. I remember feeling that way very strongly last spring. And then maybe put in the Q&A if you felt that way too. If you remember that feeling of, I can't wait till this is over. I just want to hug everybody so tight. This spring, my visions of the future are different because I'm different, right? And how many of you does that resonate with? Where we thought we would be, where everything would just be flung wide open and things would be just 100% back to normal at some point, isn't quite where we are either. We feel different. Inside the grim cocoon of quarantine, I've metamorphosed, did I pronounce that right? Metamorphosed into someone else or something else, like a toad, but without the cool amphibian powers. We've sort of become something different, and she's treating that very lightly, that we've become something reptilian. But there is the sense that we've changed. We're not who we were a year and a half ago or last spring. Now I just try to picture how I'm going to present the new me once things open up for real. I mean, I have to figure everybody else got weird too. Hello, I eat flies now. So this idea that we're not alone in feeling that we're forever changed, that we're not the people that we were last spring, that so much has changed in terms of our own sense of boundaries and safety, and kind of our beliefs about the world may have changed too. Is the world a fundamentally safe place? We had that sense of ease with one another, and in each other's presence. And I don't know if we'll ever get that back completely the way we had it before, but certainly I think most of us don't have it right now. It's a process of easing back. So how do we have that conversation with folks? How do we begin to talk to other people about kind of what we need in this moment to feel safe, to feel comfortable with social interaction? And I put this section in our talk today because I hear this a lot from my clients of like, I don't want to be a bother to people. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this, but I don't want to say anything. I don't want to, be the one who makes trouble, who makes waves. Everybody else seems to be comfortable with this. I'll just stay home, or I'll just go along with what they're doing, but then I'll feel worried about getting sick. So how do we talk about this? Because we're all in the same boat and everybody's having these concerns. And I think it's important first to talk about the fact that there's kind of an elephant in the room, and that elephant is vaccination status. And I even thought, should I talk about that today? Because it's a touchy subject. Are you vaccinated or aren't you? And how do you feel about that? And why have you gotten vaccinated or not vaccinated? And I think there's a desire not to offend people, but it's also something that's on people's minds because it does make a difference in terms of safety. So people are making a lot of different choices. And it's important, I think, when we have these conversations with folks, that to understand that they come from a place of fear often. How can I feel safe? And for some people, they can feel safe by getting vaccinated. And for other people, getting vaccinated feels dangerous. It feels safer not to get vaccinated. And there's a lot of values behind this. I saw an interesting article in the New York Times this morning about ultra-Orthodox folks in New York, and women in particular, that there was a rumor in the community, it's not scientifically based, that the vaccine could affect your fertility. And so many younger women in this community of childbearing age are choosing not to get vaccinated because of a fear that it would affect their fertility. And there's a public health campaign within the Orthodox community to dispel this rumor. So the value behind not getting vaccinated in that case is I want to have a large family. I want to protect my fertility. And so you may not agree with that. You may say, well, that's not science-based. But there's a value behind that which you can appreciate and understand and respect. What could be more important to a young woman who wants to have a family than protecting her fertility? So I give that as an example that when we have these conversations, we may disagree with the choices people have made, but it's really important to approach one another with respect for the desire to stay safe and the values behind the decisions people make, even if we come to very different conclusions. And by the way, this is really good advice for working through differences and talking to people about all kinds of differences in relationship when we want to have a conversation. It's just really important here because there's an urgency to have these conversations. I wanted to give an example too, about believing things that are not scientific. I think of myself as somebody who makes science-based decisions. I decided to get vaccinated. And then I was thinking, are there things that I believe that are not so science-based? And I thought of the example of chicken soup. And so not to trivialize an important subject here, but I kind of believe that chicken soup is really good for you if you're sick. Well, is that in the scientific literature? I don't think so. That was passed along to me culturally. That came to be something I believed. And a lot of people get information transmitted culturally through people that they love and care about from generation to generation. And so I think part of that respect for the beliefs of one another can come through a deeper understanding of the cultural significance and the sources of information that people are using to make their decisions. And I'm just pausing to check the Q&A. Like to do those as we go along. So it's really good to discuss these differences in beliefs and to do so in an atmosphere of respect and openness. One of the strategies that can be really helpful is just to reflect back what you're hearing. So I'm hearing you say that you decided to get vaccinated because all things considered, that made you feel safer. I'm hearing you say that you've decided to continue to wear a mask even though you're vaccinated because you just want to err on the side of safety. You may disagree with one of those things, but to just kind of reflect back what you're hearing to somebody, it's really validating for people to know they've been heard. At the same time, you don't ever have to compromise, and you shouldn't compromise your own sense of personal safety. That comes first. I gave this talk to a different group a month ago, and one of the questions was, I have a friend who's not vaccinated and who doesn't wear a mask. And when I drive in the car with her with the windows closed, I wear a mask. I'm vaccinated, but she won't wear a mask. And should I drive in the car with her? And so I said, well, do you feel safe? And she said, no, I don't feel safe. So that answers the question. If you don't feel safe based on your own personal barometer of what is safe and isn't, then you shouldn't do it, right? You shouldn't compromise your own sense of safety to be polite. That's not worth it. So you can politely and assertively let people know what you need, and most people will be very responsive. And if they won't, you could say in that example, I'd love to see you. I love spending time with you. I will meet you there. Let's not drive together. Right? So there are ways to be assertive and polite and still make sure that you're feeling as safe as you can during this difficult time of uncertainty. For some people, you might want to role play that. If assertiveness is not your strength and you've got a friend or a neighbor or a partner who, is of similar mind, might make it easier about these things, and you can role play and say, can I just try out on you what I'm going to say? And then you be, my friend that I'm having difficulty talking to these things about. That might be helpful. Many people are under assertive. I would say most people are under assertive in these issues. Some people can be over assertive, and they might want to role play too. I'm thinking of my neighbor who told me recently that she struggles with a lot of social anxiety. And I was shocked because the way I experience her is over assertive. She'll often ask for something in a way that can come across as like really kind of almost aggressive if she needs something or wants something. And her requests are always super reasonable. But she'll be like, I need you to move your car, instead of like, hey, would you mind moving your car so that I can park there because I have to unload some groceries, right? So if you're somebody who maybe comes across as too assertive, sometimes people do that because they have so much discomfort asking for things that they need that they kind of blurt it out, or they are overly assertive in a way that can come across and alienate people. So if you might be under assertive, you hate asking anybody for anything and you never speak up, or you're over assertive where you can come across as overly aggressive and maybe kind of be a little off-putting, just role play it. If you don't have anybody to role play it with, that's what a mirror is for. Just practice it with yourself of how you want to come across as you have these conversations. And then if you do have a partner to role play it with, say, how was that? How did you experience me saying that? So if you said to somebody, I'll give you a personal example, that last summer before the vaccine was around, I got together with some friends in the park and we wore masks and we socially distanced. And we, the socially distancing recommendations at that point, at least, were 6 feet apart. And we all sat down about 3 feet apart and people started talking. And I thought, this really isn't 6 feet. I feel a little uncomfortable. I feel a little nervous, but I didn't want to be the one to say anything, and I didn't. And then I got home and I thought, oh, I wonder if that was too close. We all had our masks off once we started eating and stuff. And then I thought, why didn't I just say something? I think of myself as an assertive person. So it's really important, I think, to practice. The next time we got together, I said, can you just go a little further back? And everybody was like, of course, it's fine. Most people are usually very happy to accommodate once we ask. So don't be afraid to ask for what you need. That's going to help to diminish anxiety. Just very briefly, our focus today is not really on the content of the public health guidelines, but I just wanted to mention the latest public health guidelines from the CDC that came out, I guess, just a couple of weeks ago, although that feels so long ago already, because things are changing so quickly, is that you can resume normal activities if you're fully vaccinated without wearing a mask, without staying 6 feet apart, except if there's another law or local business guideline that says otherwise. So that's pretty confusing already, right? Because there are a lot of local laws and business guidelines that are going to differ, but that's the basic CDC guideline. And then the CDC went on to say you should still wear masks when you're traveling, if you're visiting a nursing home or hospital, and if you have a weakened immune system, you should discuss it with your doctor. Should you, if you're fully vaccinated, Is it okay to stop wearing a mask or socially distancing in these day-to-day situations? And that's kind of vague too, right? Because not everybody knows what a weakened immune system means in terms of, does that mean an autoimmune condition? Just by virtue of being older, does that put you at increased risk? So not a lot of clarity, and yet some new guidelines. So this question of why am I so anxious, that we're here today to first address the question, why are we feeling this way? And then try to get some solutions to help reduce anxiety. Why are we feeling so anxious as a society right now? Whenever there's a lack of clarity about how we should behave in social situations, it's inherently anxiety provoking, right? Any social situation, virus aside, where we're not sure how to behave or what the norms are, we're going to feel a little anxious. And there's so many things here right now that are, ambiguous socially. Do I wear a mask? Don't I wear a mask? Am I standing too close to that person? Is it okay to give them a hug or shake their hand? Is it okay to ask if somebody's vaccinated? To that one, I would say, yes, it is okay to ask. If you'd like to know that information, you should ask. Is it okay to ask why they decided to get vaccinated? Or not get vaccinated. So there's a lot of ambiguity in all these social things. And Roseanne pointed out, not only do we feel uncomfortable sometimes in these social interactions, but then there's sort of the awareness of the families of these people. And what are they thinking about all of this? I was with my friends, alone with my friend's 13-year-old the other day. We went shopping, and she's had her first shot, and I'm fully vaccinated. And in the car, I said, should we take our masks off? Is that okay? And she said, yes, that's fine. And then I thought, well, is it okay with her mother? Like, do I need to call the mother? And how would the 13-year-old feel if I called the mother? There's so many layers to this, right? Of what's safe and what isn't safe at this time, and this concern about judgment. And I just want to, I'm not going to maybe be able to get to all of this right now, but I want to get to some of the questions in the comments right now. So somebody asked a very practical question about how long the vaccine lasts and about booster shots. So I can tell you right now, I don't know. I'm not a public health expert, so we're not going to be able to answer that today. And also, I do know that there are no answers to this yet. They're finding that the vaccines are long lasting, but they don't know exactly how long lasting. They're looking at booster shots, but they've not yet been created or released. So I think that the thing that we're going to have to do is follow this public health guidance very closely. And at the end, I'm going to give you some sources of information that are reliable and unbiased where you can get that. Somebody asked a question that I'm going to get to later on about the honor system. Somebody said I was over assertive and impolitic on another call this morning. The facilitator changed the rules for conducting the discussion on the fly. I didn't register the change. And then I was frustrated by not being acknowledged to speak using the usual rule, the former rule, and spoke up after several minutes. The facilitator she changed the rules, and she was leading the discussion, so I just left the discussion. So that's an example of how we can be over assertive, get ourselves in trouble, and in this case, you ended that interaction. And so the goal is to find the sweet spot. We need to let our needs be known, and we want to do it in a way, and you're recognizing the person who made this comment, you're recognizing yourself that it's maybe a little impolitic, that there's a way to do these things, and then there's a way that maybe is a little bit too aggressive, but it's never wrong to make our needs met. It's finding a way to do it politely, at the right time, and with respect for others. Somebody said that they're already experiencing segregation and discrimination between being vaccinated and not, and prizes and rewards for getting the jab. What is that about? And somebody else said, can you trust people who are against the vaccine? So even in these few comments, you can see, right, there's this sense of, can we trust one another? I'm being discriminated against. I'm being segregated. Can I trust the honor system? There's a lot of division between us now. And this is hard, right? We're all doing our best, regardless of whether or not you like the choices that people are making or not making, even though you may not feel like their best is good enough in some cases. We're all doing our best to navigate this really difficult terrain. And it's going to take a lot of patience with one another and a lot of mutual respect that's hard sometimes to say, how can I balance all of these competing things right now so that we can all try to feel safe? And so I don't have any answers to those questions except to validate that this is really challenging. The other reason that we're so anxious right now is that there's a lack of clarity, not just about social interactions and how they should be conducted, but about how do we stay safe? And what could be more anxiety provoking than am I safe and is my family safe? I went to a training Wednesday with a nationally renowned grief expert, Robert Niemeyer, and he talked about how the sense of lack of safety that people are feeling during the pandemic, it's often wordless and it's felt in the body. And I thought that was really profound. We often don't even have words for that sense of unsafety that we have and concern for ourselves and our families at this time. And so we may have GI symptoms, we may have, a rapid heartbeat, we may have a headache. There's a lot of physiological symptoms of anxiety too. And we may not even have the words to describe how profound it is to feel physically unsafe or worried for our family's safety. What could be more anxiety provoking? And at the same time that things are reopening, there's still a lot of lack of clarity in these guidelines. They're changing all the time. There's still so much we don't know about this virus, and new science and data is coming in. And the question that somebody posed, well, what about boosters? What about how long the vaccine lasts? Science doesn't know the answers to these questions yet. They're still figuring it out. And that creates anxiety when even the very people charged with knowing don't know yet. And these treatments are all new. The vaccine is new. Very young children still can't be vaccinated. And even with the vaccines, as effective as they are, they're not 100%, right? So all these things come together to kind of create a perfect storm of anxiety. So that's the answer to the question of why are we feeling so anxious? There's lots of good reason to feel anxious right now. And this whole mask issue, I know for myself and for many of my clients, just as they were beginning to come out again, as things were beginning to open up, and there was anxiety, and then a period where people were starting to feel more confident. Okay, I'm getting used to this. For example, I can go back to the grocery store now, and for people who are vaccinated, they felt pretty comfortable with a mask on at the grocery store being fully vaccinated. And then it was, oops, we don't have to wear masks, and it's on the honor system. It changed again. And somebody commented earlier about, can we trust people on the honor system? And for many people, the answer to that is no. I don't really trust people right now because there's really an unprecedented amount of distrust in society right now. We have been through and are going through a time of tremendous tumult. There's ideological divisions, there's political divisions. We have different values in some ways about things. So all of this makes the honor system problematic. We'd love to all live in a society where we could fully trust everybody and the honor system would be wonderful. But a lot of people are saying, oh, I don't know if I do trust people to be on the honor system, that they're only not going to wear a mask if they're vaccinated. So then again, you have to adjust and more anxiety. All right, so I hope I'm not creating too much anxiety and going through all the reasons that we're anxious. So what is safe? There's no 100% safety other than here on Zoom, but I would recommend that you follow the science and the current guidance from reliable sources, and I'll talk about reliable sources at the end. Each and every one of you has to know your own level of risk tolerance. It's not the same for everybody. My client just before this said, I'm thinking about staying in a hotel. Is that safe? And I said, I can't answer that question for you. It might be completely safe feeling for me. It is, I would stay in a hotel, but that doesn't mean for somebody else that they would feel safe staying in a hotel, right? You've got to know your own personal level of risk tolerance, given your vaccine status and given you're just kind of your own barometer of, are you willing to accept some risk now for the sake of getting back to normal? Or would you rather be more on the cautious side? How do you make other decisions? Do you tend to be more cautious, or do you tend to be able to accept a certain amount of risk without having undue anxiety? My colleague Lisa Andrews said that she'd been talking with her clients about this idea of a personal reopening plan. And I love that terminology, or that way of conceptualizing um, this idea of our own level of risk tolerance and what that's going to look like for each of us. And it won't be the same for each of us, and that's okay. And then to know that there's not one thing that keeps us safe, that we should use a layered approach to stay safe, with many different layers of mitigation, so that we're trying to reduce the risk of this virus. And very importantly, I can't stress enough, we can't control other people's behavior. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could control everybody else's behavior? But we can't. And so we can ask people for what we need. We can politely be assertive, but we also have to focus on what we can control and what we can't control. And there's a lot we can control. And the more we focus not so much on, that guy over there, his mask is below his nose and it's making me anxious. I can't change that, but I can choose to leave a situation if that's making me anxious. So there are things we can control and things we can't. And if we focus on the things we can control, that's going to reduce anxiety. Oops. So here's just a slide showing the layered approach that I was mentioning a moment ago, where there's lots of different things that keep us safe. First and foremost, vaccination, but then all these things that you've been hearing about these many months that we've been dealing with this, like social distancing, masking, wiping down surfaces. Fresh air is a really important one. To be in a well-ventilated space or outdoors is very protective. So again, knowing that anxiety is normal can be helpful in itself to reduce anxiety. Just making some space for the fact that we're feeling anxious and kind of naming it and not letting it be so wordless. Sometimes when we try to push away an unpleasant feeling like anxiety is unpleasant. Sometimes we try to push that away and get rid of it. And what happens? It comes back even stronger. Kind of the more we try to get rid of it, the more intense it can feel. So sometimes just saying, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now, maybe naming my stomach feels a little uncomfortable. My heart's maybe beating a little faster. I'm feeling anxious right now. I'm just taking a deep breath and kind of making space for what we're feeling and just allowing it to be there instead of trying to push it away. Talking openly about our concerns, even if that's not your usual style. Setting these boundaries and rules that feel safe, and that'll be different for each of us, can be really helpful. So some particular strategies that we use in counseling to help people, and that I thought I would share with you here, we're going to go over next. And first, I just want to check in again on the Q&A. Somebody said, what do you say to a friend who makes fun of you out loud and sort of shames you because wearing a mask in a group setting where others may not be? She also makes fun and shames those who choose not to eat indoors in a restaurant. She's one of the people who's very vocal. That's a great question, and that was from Barbara. Barbara, that's a great question, how to deal with that kind of behavior. First and foremost, you have every right to not eat in a restaurant, to wear a mask if you feel safer. It's almost like that old advice that your parent said, if Jimmy was going to jump off a bridge, does that mean you would too? You have every right to make the decisions that feel right for you and that feel safe for you. And I think that is a time for assertiveness, and maybe even I bet you the group might even appreciate it if you're in a group setting, if you called out that behavior. And you can do that in a polite way. You don't, that Michelle Obama quote about when they go low, we go high. You don't have to go low and shame her back. But I think that you could say something like, I feel a little bit shamed when you say that. This is what feels comfortable to me. And it'd be really important to me if you would respect that. You could say that to her privately. I'm saying her, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but you could say that to your friend privately, or you could say that to your friend in front of the group. But I think to say how it makes you feel, and then that you're going to continue this behavior. And Roseanne, you wanted to add something? Go ahead.
So there were also a number of comments and contributions made in the chat that I don't think you've seen. So at some point we can get to that. But as well, there was another in the Q&A that I responded to, and then I don't think you see it, Sharon.
Yeah, it shows up as dismissed.
So there's one comment that was inquiring, we be discussing how much older we feel after this 1 year. Even though it's only 1 year, it seems that my age is now a bigger factor for me. My age and, for example, driving fear.
Was the last one driving fear?
Driving fear. So because of not driving all this time, now we're driving in traffic again. What does that feel like? We shut down, we had this world with no traffic. Now we're all the things we're doing new again. The world has changed again so dramatically.
And I was able to access the chat now too, so I see them as well.
Okay.
So great point about how we feel like we've aged. And for older adults, so many folks have said to me, you know, when you're younger, a year is, you know, a year. For an older adult, a year feels like a big percentage of how much time we have left, so you feel sort of, you know, even more robbed of that time. And then also this issue of feeling like you've aged more than the amount of time that's passed. Went to the doctor the other day and they said, oh yeah, you were here about, you know, a year and a half ago. And I had no memory of it. And then it feels like a different lifetime a year and a half ago. I didn't even remember the visit. And so, yes, there's this sense of this great gap of time, and especially for older adults, but for people of every age, there's a lot of physical changes that have taken place from being relatively homebound for a year and a half. So many people have gotten, you know, deconditioned, weaker. I've had clients say to me, you know, I used to come see you in the office before the pandemic, but when you reopen, I can't make it to your office anymore. I've stopped driving, or I can't make that long walk from the parking lot the way I used to. I'm weaker, my legs are not what they were. So yes, this aging has taken place. It's a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up.
I wonder if that last question also, Sharon, kind of relates to the question before, this idea where we may have had strategies in social situations before the pandemic. We may not be as comfortable confronting one another, having safe ways to respond to people who are inappropriate. We might have been able to do that a year and a half ago, but maybe our responses are a little slower too. So we have to give ourselves time to get going again, to learn how to comfortably confront people respectfully, polite.
Yeah, good point. That's such a good point. Somebody made a point about why chicken soup really is good for you. So I stand corrected. There's some medical basis for that belief. Somebody made the point that vaccines are not a panacea. They're not 100%. You can still, test positive or get sick even if you have the vaccine, which is true. They're highly effective, but they're not 100%. Somebody put in a study, which I'm not going to have time to get to now, about fertility studies and the vaccine. I think talking about the importance of vaccination, I think, was the point there.
I think the point of it was that coronavirus causes a lot of problems. So if you looked at that article, it was about potential erectile dysfunction as a result of the virus. So there's a lot of information on both sides, lots of information and studies out there about the risk of both.
And somebody made a point about using terminology differently, that they're a transplant patient, and when they say they're in quarantine, they mean they're in quarantine. They are literally quarantined. And somebody used the term very casually, like, oh, we've all been in quarantine, let's get together and have lunch. And so defining terms is really important, because that's when we use that term, casually, like meaning we've been, socially isolating more. That's absolutely not the same as really being quarantined in the same way that somebody with a organ transplant would need to be. Okay. Somebody also said maybe the person who made a comment to the other questioner, if somebody is shaming you, maybe they're more of a frenemy than a friend, right? So that is a behavior to think about, but certainly I would always recommend trying to talk it through and letting the person know how their comments made you feel. Sometimes just to give people the benefit of the doubt, you might experience something as shaming, and then you might bring it up, and they might even say, I'm so sorry. I was trying to be lighthearted and funny. That really did not land the way I meant it to. And so sometimes, and you'd be surprised, there is misinterpretation that somebody, you may really experience something as hostile or shaming. I'm not saying that was true here. They may absolutely have been shaming or mocking, but sometimes we can experience something very differently than the person meant it, and it can just land wrong. And that's all the more reason to talk these things through, because misunderstandings do happen. So I'm going to get to more questions shortly, but let me go through some of these strategies to reduce anxiety. So one of them is to use visualization. So when you're actually with somebody in a social situation, if you notice that you're feeling a little anxious as we're reopening, one of the things you can do is just use a visualization that's helpful for you. One of the things might be just to imagine sort of a plexiglass shield. We've all gotten used to that between you and the other person. Or just imagine yourself sort of surrounded in a bubble of safety or a cloud of safety. Whatever would work for you, that's going to help you kind of instill a sense of calm. The other thing is to just silently say to yourself as you're breathing in, breathe in safety. As you're breathing out, to breathe out fear. And just these simple kinds of, a deep breath with a word that's soothing or a visualization can be helpful. And then before and after a social interaction, you can use visualization strategies to kind of, give you a sense of calm before you go out into the world or after you come back from being in the world. One of the things that, many people use is just imagining themselves on a beach and sitting in a comfortable chair with their toes in the sand and kind of using all of your senses to imagine maybe the sun on your hair, the sound of the water, the feeling of the toes, the sand in your toes, whatever kind of the sounds of the beach, to try to just take a mini vacation by visualizing that relaxing scene before you go. Another thing that can be helpful as people are trying to relax is that our thoughts can kind of come in a torrent. Did I stand too close? Did I take too many risks? Should I go? Why did I go? All those kinds of worried thoughts. Again, sometimes the more we push them away, the more powerful they can become. So sometimes just to use this simple exercise of imagining your thoughts are a river and you're watching the river go by. So you don't have to invite these thoughts in for tea. You don't have to push them away. Just imagine all of those thoughts that come to you are a river and you're watching the river go by. It can be something to reduce anxiety. Let's see if I skip some stuff here. The other technique that we would use that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy is the idea of gradual exposure. They used to talk, if people had a lot of anxiety or a phobia, about this idea of flooding. If you're afraid of something, you just expose yourself to it all at once. So if you're, to use an extreme example, if you're afraid of bridges, you might just drag somebody out to a bridge, right? And then they'll get over it. It's not a good way to address anxiety and fear. What can be really helpful is a very gradual approach where you do one little thing that's not very scary, and then you do something that's a tiny bit scarier and a tiny bit scarier. And we call this a graded hierarchy. So you can make your own personal graded hierarchy. So probably in terms of, anxiety about COVID, at least being on Zoom is a 0 risk. So that would be a 1 on your hierarchy. 2 might be, it'll be different for different people, but for example, getting together with one friend who's vaccinated outdoors with masks, right? That might be something that's not very anxiety provoking. 3 might be, getting together indoors with somebody who's vaccinated with a mask, right? So you kind of would work your way up, and you don't ever want to go so high on your hierarchy. Your hierarchy shouldn't include something that you feel is objectively unsafe, right? You want to stay within what you've decided makes sense and feels safe for you. But if you're still feeling jittery and anxious and not able to kind of make yourself do things you'd like to be able to do, this can be an approach to kind of put your toe in the water, start with something that's not too scary, and gradually work your way up as you're feeling more comfortable to more and more activities within those safety boundaries that you've established. Um, there's also a technique from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is when we look at our thoughts, we kind of become aware of our own thought process rather than just kind of experiencing our thoughts as facts, to realize that thoughts are just thoughts, to take a look at them and write them down, and then think, is that thought distorted? Is that thought accurate and balanced? Or is it kind of extreme? So, one example of a distorted thought would be when we magnify something. And so, just to give you an example, is that if we had the thought, if there's some risk, then I'll probably get sick. That would be an example of magnification, because just because there's some risk doesn't mean you'll probably get sick, right? There's kind of a mismatch there. So, a more balanced thought might be, there's some risk, but since that risk is small for those who are vaccinated, it's unlikely that I'll get sick, right? So we're still being honest. We're not saying there's no risk. We're just kind of bringing that thought into balance to make it more balanced. And when we do that, it reduces our anxiety, hopefully. So those kind of writing down our thoughts, seeing if our thoughts are provoking more anxiety, and then thinking if we can write down a more balanced thought that's a little bit less extreme, a little bit less black and white, can often be very helpful to reduce anxiety. Another strategy that's important is to look at the evidence. Also comes right from cognitive behavioral therapy. So when we're trying to look for information, we want to be sure we're looking for balanced information. And one of the things we do is we might, what they call a confirmation bias. We might look for information that kind of confirms what we're already thinking. So if we're already thinking danger, 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 we might kind of subconsciously pick out news sources that confirm there's a danger and read about, a variant every day. And we might kind of not bother to read a lot of stories that are like, oh, things are getting better in the United States. The rates are going down for the most part. So we want to look for information that's balanced, that doesn't veer too strongly to one side or the other, and try to look at our actual risks by looking at objective sources of information. So I wanted to try to share some reliable sources of information with you, and you'll all get these slides after the presentation. And I went to, I forgot the name of the organization that's, tries to identify for people unbalanced sources of information. I'm forgetting the name of the organization, but they suggested looking at news organizations that have won Pulitzer Prizes because they're respected by objective sources for quality journalism and investigative reporting. And so this is a list of some organizations, some news organizations that have won the Pulitzer Prize, and they're from both ends of the political spectrum. You've got the Wall Street Journal, you've got the Chicago Tribune, those are more conservative. You've got the New York Times, et cetera, on the more liberal side in terms of their editorial policies. But these are all widely respected sources of information. And unreliable sources of information are things like social media and anecdotes. And they tend to have an outsized effect on us because it's often from people we know well and that we trust that we hear this information. And it's often not reliable. To give a personal example, at the outset of the pandemic, my best friend's mother sadly died of COVID in a nursing home in Boston. And that personal story and my feeling for her and my friend really affected me in my sense about the virus and about risk. And it really had nothing to do with my situation, not in a nursing home in Chicago, right? But that personal story deeply affected me in terms of my own sense of safety and risk. But that wasn't really a reliable source of information for me to draw conclusions about the overall level of risk of COVID, right? For there, I should have gone to sources like the media, trusted sources of media, and organizations like the CDC, the WHO, the World Health Organization, the local Department of Public Health. All of these places are going to give me much broader sense than one anecdote about what's really going on. So I encourage you to look at those sources. Another strategy that's really helpful is mindfulness and meditation. It helps us be in the present. We're all trying to, kind of move past this pandemic phase and the future kind of makes us a little anxious. So what better place to be right now than learning to be in the present as we're reopening? And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my colleague, Chloe Gramad's, every week she has a mindfulness drop-in group on Zoom called Mindfulness with Chloe. And the link is here, but it's also, if you go to our website, cje.net, on the calendar, you can find that weekly drop-in group. It's just a half an hour, and you might really enjoy that as a time of kind of relaxation and self-care. But I've also listed a couple of external sites for meditation and mindfulness as well, free. And then lastly, I wanted to mention a couple of populations where I think things are going to be particularly hard and where you might want to reach out for some professional help and assistance if you're struggling. One group are folks who had a lot of social anxiety before the pandemic and now are being told, okay, go socialize again. For these groups, it might be really hard. There may have been a sense of ease and comfort in not having to socialize in person this last year. And so it's important to not kind of stay in this isolated place if you can begin to socialize again. When people have lost somebody due to COVID, as my friend did, then there's the whole issue of the grief associated with those losses. And you may feel really that it's especially hard to kind of get back out there and begin to socialize again. And then I think anytime somebody is having anxiety that kind of interferes with day-to-day functioning, that you can't do the things you want to be able to do, that it seems like maybe you're having a harder time functioning than people around you. It goes on over a period of time, like at least 2 weeks, say, where you're feeling that you're just not functioning as well or feeling as well as you'd like to. And especially if it's getting worse rather than better over time, and you've tried some of these self-help strategies that we've talked about, and you're still feeling that way, really encourage you to reach out for some professional support. That's why we're here, as well as other sources of support. So we are currently offering counseling services via telehealth. That could be just by telephone, or it could be by a video connection here on Zoom, which we've all gotten comfortable with. We do accept insurance, and all of our staff are licensed clinical social workers. And then here are some other resources that you can use at any time. The Friendship Line is a national treasure, really. It's a national warm line. So you don't have to be in crisis. Anytime you want to reach out and talk to somebody, it's made just for older adults, 24 hours a day, as well as some other resources here that you can feel free to reach out to. So with that, I'm going to stop. Well, let me just move ahead to our, we're not done yet, but I'm going to put up that slide and just take a look at any additional comments. And let me just.
There are a few in there, Sharon. I wanted to be sure that we answer the one that says, I've gotten comfortable on Zoom, and will CJE keep offering Zoom programming? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. We've all gotten comfortable on Zoom. We're aware of how much more accessible we are. We're happy to have 76 participants in the program today. Normally we'd have 10 or 12 people in a room. So we are going to keep doing this kind of programming, as are other departments across the agency. We're thrilled with the attendance in the way that people are participating.
Thank you for asking the question, Roseanne. Thank you for answering it. And yes, we will continue to be here, as she said. I also see that somebody else commented that as people get older, our immune systems tend to decline. And so does that mean the vaccine is really as effective for older adults as it is for younger populations? And actually some studies have said that yes, they weren't sure it would be because of that very issue that you've raised, but they were surprised and pleased to find a robust immune response in older adults who were vaccinated, and that it was a lasting response over time. And we're seeing in nursing homes across the country where the rates of vaccination have been very, very high, that the virus is all but disappearing. Thank God that that's the case. But yes, that's a concern, and you're absolutely right when you say we're still learning, and it's hard to know exactly where we stand. That part is certainly true, that we're still learning exactly where we stand.
I think the other thing we just want to touch on as briefly as possible is that issue of, yes, so there are some breakthrough COVID with people who are vaccinated, as was mentioned. A number of people mentioned the cruise ships and that some vaccinated people are getting COVID. But the issue being that the experience of the virus is much less serious, that people are not in as critical a condition. So that it seems to be that evidence is holding out that it is worth getting the vaccine to reduce the seriousness of a potential infection. And then I think we have to start to wrap up, Sharon.
Yes, I want to thank you all so much for being here. And I noticed somebody said in the comments that they get anxious in crowded places, etc. Somebody talked about, fractured relationships over these issues. There's so many concerns that we can't fully address here today with the time that we have. But I think all of these issues are challenging right now. And I think we do our best to, use our own personal barometers of what we can tolerate and what we can't right now, to know that we're here to support you through our counseling services if you need ongoing support, and make use of the other resources we gave you, to know that whatever you're feeling is normal right now, to try to respect that people are going to have different political feelings, and that enters into these vaccine decisions too, or just different vaccination decisions for non-political reasons, and to try to use that framework of respectful conversation. And hopefully we can avoid this kind of, fracturing of relationships that can occur, because our relationships, as we've all learned over the last, almost year and a half, are the most precious resource we have, right? So we want to hang on to them. We want to deepen them. And yet this is not easy terrain. This is really challenging. So we're happy you were here with us today to begin this conversation. We know that it's not the final word by any means. And we look forward to continuing to engage with you around these issues as we're working on our own reopening plan at CJE slowly. And we will continue to be here for you through Zoom programs as well. We don't see that going away. And we're glad that's one of the positives, as we've learned this new way to connect with you, and we'll continue to do so. So thank you so much for being here.
Say thank you. That was so much information, so complex. The way that you wove all that together, you really did a great job, Sharon, of pulling together this complicated world that we're living in, and all of the confused state that we're all living in as we try to get back to normal, which will never be the same normal we had before. Brilliant. What a great presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And with that, we wish you a happy lunch hour.